Thank you to you all for being here, and thank you especially to our panelists. We have three amazing panelists, I think one alum, two alums from U of M, for taking the time to join us and share their experiences and their expertise in the field. So I'm going to start by introducing them, and then we will move forward into the question portion. So first we have Sean Law. Sean is an applied research and data scientist currently working with the Exploration Lab team and serves as an advisor on the Enterprise AI Council at TD Ameritrade. He has experience producing cutting-edge methodologies, building high-performance predictive models, and developing rapid prototypes. Additionally, he co-organizes the monthly PyData Ann Arbor Data Science Meetup and is also the creator and core maintainer of Stumpy, a powerful and scalable open source Python library that can be used for a variety of time series data mining tasks. Welcome, Sean, and thanks for being here. Next, we have Rose Putler. Rose will be starting as a data scientist at Duo Security on June 1st, and she is leaving her role as a bioinformatics scientist at Thermo Fisher Scientific, where she worked on oncology sequencing panel development. She has previous experience as a research scientist in both infectious diseases and pediatric nephrology labs at Michigan Medicine, and as a technical services team lead at the healthcare software company Epic. Rose has a bachelor's in statistics from UCLA and a master's in biostatistics from the University of Michigan. She is also a co-organizer of the local PyData Meetup. Welcome, Rose. And finally, we have Steve Schwartz. Steve is the founder of Alpha Django, co-founder and CTO of Genomenon, previously co-founder and CTO of Carcode, which was acquired by Edmunds.com in 2014. And developer of several open source projects amassing over 100 million downloads from around the world. His current company, Genomenon, powers pharma and clinical genomics with Mastermind, the world's most comprehensive source of genomic association evidence from the medical literature. Welcome, Steve. Thank you all for being here. Okay, we're gonna jump in. First question, I'm gonna start with Rose and then ask the other panelists to jump in after she answers. Can you just tell us a little bit about your current job and what a typical day looks like for you? And we know you're leaving your current position. So I'm actually gonna ask you to talk a little bit about what you currently do and then what you'll be doing, just a little brief snippet of what you'll be doing at Duo.
Yeah, so I currently am a bioinformatics scientist. So I sort of think of that as a data scientist with sort of less statistics on some level. So a lot of, taking big sets of data, doing a lot of sort of filtering and modification and sort of parsing of that data, and then summarizing to sort of have a business goal and have some feedback that allows us to make business decisions. In this case, it's sort of clinical sequencing decisions. So looking at, we have this oncology panel or we have this reproductive health panel we're trying to develop. So there are folks sort of upstream that do the actual like chemistry and molecular biology piece. And I get the data out and I say, okay, are we actually doing as well as we say we want to and as well as our customers expect us to? And then giving that information back to sort of algorithm developers and sort of bench scientists to say, how can we modify the chemistry or modify the algorithm based on what we're seeing to actually sort of give our customers what we want and have the performance we want. So like a lot of jobs, it involves a lot of, what is the request, understanding the request, and, prioritizing those requests and sort of doing the data analysis pieces that provide answers sort of for others doing downstream work.
And what will you be doing at Duo? What's the position?
So I am starting in a week and a half at Duo Security, and I'll be on their data science team on sort of a more of an internally focused consulting type role. Obviously, I don't know fully what that means yet, but helping other teams leverage the data to sort of improve their work, sort of in contrast to other data science folks on the team who are doing more data science tools to be put into the product. And I know a lot of all the University of Michigan folks know Duo Security as the dual authentication company that is used. So.
Sean, Steve, can you jump in as well and tell us a little bit about your current jobs?
Sure, I'll jump in. It's actually a little bit related to the Thermo Fisher, what Thermo Fisher was doing there. So we basically provide evidence from the medical literature for clinicians and pharma companies. So on the clinical side, they use our information to help drive diagnoses and find treatment plans for patients with cancer or rare inherited disease. And on the pharma side, they use our data to help do molecular research on the drugs that they're developing, and also to help them target their clinical trial design, or also to repurpose existing drugs on the market for new purposes based on the functional mechanisms in the genomics, in the human genomics of how that drug interacts with human biology, and finding those sort of related diseases that might be also positively affected by a given drug. And so we're kind of in an interesting space where we deal a lot with human genomics and disease-causing genomics, but what we actually do is we pull all of the known information about genomics from the medical literature. So we deal a lot with, on the textual processing side, unstructured textual data, and pulling insight out of what a lot of people consider to be natural language. I call it genomic language or scientific language, which is actually a little bit easier than natural language to deal with. It's similar to legal documents where there's very specific ways to get across the ideas that you're trying to get across in a given paper or a given study. And if you don't use the loaded words that mean exactly the thing you're trying to say, then even another doctor who's reading your paper might not know what you meant. And so thankfully, the sort of plain text or the language aspect of what we do is narrowed a bit from natural language. Instead of thousands of ways to express an idea, there's tens or maybe 100. And so we deal a lot with the processing of that kind of data and pulling insight out of it. And so we're sort of a hybrid company between data processing and genomics, the science of genomics.
Great. And Sean?
Yeah, so I think as Trisha mentioned, I work at a company called TD Ameritrade. So we're a online brokerage, so allowing you to place stock trades, options, trade in futures and foreign exchanges. And I happen to be working on a technology research and development team. So I used to be a postdoc at the University of Michigan before transitioning into industry. And I kind of view it as being a postdoc in industry, but being compensated probably more appropriately, right? And I would say that because we're an R&D team, our goal is to explore new and emerging technologies, or in the case of data science, new and emerging methodologies that might help the company differentiate ourselves from our competitors. And that also means that we're trying to take on as much of the risk as possible from our business partners, from our technology partners, because they're the ones that are putting things into production, but we're the ones that are trying to assume some of that risk. Because some things might not pan out. If you think about new technologies that are constantly coming out, not everything is as promising as they're hyped up to be. And that's what our team is involved in exploring in a very short period of time, is very much test and learn and fail fast if things don't work out. And when things do work out, we transition those initial proofs of concepts that we build out, we transition into our business and production technology teams.
And Sean, you mentioned that you were a postdoc. I'm going to move on to the next question and start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background and your early career path, and basically answer the question of how did you get where you are today?
Sure. I think it's probably important, especially for the people who are listening and watching, right, to know that, especially for data science, right, even the term itself hasn't been around for that long. And when I first started, my undergrad was actually in a fairly multidisciplinary department. So I was doing a minor in applied math and then a major in biology with a focus in biochemistry. But I really actually hated the biology part because I have very bad memory. But I loved computational stuff and equations, right? I did a lot of summer research in Canada, and then was on track to maybe go to medical school. That didn't happen, right? And then I was recommended that, hey, have you considered going to graduate school? It seems like a lot of the training that you have would be great, right? I had good grades for medical school anyways. So I ultimately decided to go to Michigan State University. So I did my PhD over there in a computational chemistry or computational sort of biochemistry, biophysics lab, where we just did computer simulations. And then after that, I was mentioned a postdoc at the University of Michigan, right? And I would have never known, you know, whether I was in high school or in college, that I would be where I am today. And so there, you know, maybe hindsight is 20/20. So I think the path led me into strange places and even into industry. I think, you know, while being a postdoc, I thought that I was going to go become a professor somewhere, and things change. You have kids, right? Different stages of one's life. So you kind of follow it wherever it takes you.
Perfect, thank you. And what about you, Steve?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how far back you go. I don't have a PhD. I went to undergrad for mechanical and electrical engineering. Even before that, you know, starting in high school, I was always very interested in math and statistics. You know, I was one of the first students, I think, ever at my high school to take a college course as a junior in high school. And that college course was Introduction to Statistics. So I was very interested in statistics from a young age, you know, statistics, calculus. I was pretty interested in theoretical physics at the time. I had a lot of fun with that kind of thing, but my passion had always been for cars, actually. So I wanted to be an automotive engineer from a very young age. And that's what I went to school for, mechanical, electrical engineering. I worked at Bosch. I always have been into cars. And then this path just sort of, I guess, unfolded before me. I got my freshman year of college, I got really into software development because I had an idea for an interesting website that I wanted to learn, that I wanted to build. And, you know, being a broke college student, I couldn't pay anyone to do it. So I learned how to do it myself. And then I really enjoyed that process. So I spent the rest of college going to class for engineering and then coming back to my apartment and, you know, teaching myself to code and build software. And I got really into open source software. I started developing a few open source tools myself that started to take off in popularity. And then by the time I graduated with my engineering degrees, I got out of engineering and into software development, started building a couple startups. And then one of the startups that I built was making software for car dealerships. And that got acquired in 2014. Even before that got acquired is when I met my current co-founder at Genomenon. His name's Dr. Mark Keel. He was an MD, PhD genomicist from U of M. And he met with me about this idea that he had. I really liked the vision of what he wanted to do. The mission of helping, essentially, you know, helping people cure cancer and other inherited disease, I always joke is a really easy mission to be passionate about. You know, almost everyone in the world has been affected in some way, either themselves or someone they love has been affected by cancer or rare disease. And so, you know, building a company that helps solve those kinds of problems is a really easy thing to be passionate about. And so over the past 6 years, we've been building Genomenon to do exactly that. And so, you know, I kind of went from engineering to teaching myself software development, to, you know, having some successful projects there, to building startups, then, you know, having a success there, and basically just sort of the way I kind of see it is sort of ratcheting up the bet that I was making, the sort of significance of the problems that I was working on, where at first I was building a little website for myself that really didn't matter much. And then ratcheting that up to open source software, which, you might build something that becomes popular, but even if it doesn't, who cares? You're building something for fun and it's free. And, well, people do blame you, but no one should be able to blame you for, whatever you release for free. And then going into a startup and then actually having built a product that was having a positive impact on, both the customers and the business for a given industry. And then, ratcheting that up to, building software in the health science space. That's sort of, I guess, been the evolution of my path to here. So no, I mean, did I have any inclination that I would end up where I am back in high school? No. Back in college? No. I mean, even, 6 years ago, no, absolutely not. It's, I never would have guessed, even when I was building my last startup, that I would make the jump from software for car dealerships to software for clinical genomics and pharmaceutical research. So it's been, I think, just seeing the opportunities as they come.
What about you, Rose?
Yeah, so I have a degree in statistics from UCLA undergrad, and I, at the time, sort of came in to college with the idea that, I do applied math, and then I realized applied math was not applied enough for me, so I sort of switched over to statistics. I minored in a sort of like quasi-culture, quasi-science minor called Society and Genetics at UCLA, and did some research in population genetics, which is sort of the ancestral genetics vein, partially because I sort of had this technical expertise I was building in my statistics classes, and I wanted sort of an interesting subject matter area to do research in and to explore. Then when I graduated from college, I spent 3 years working at Epic, which is the EHR company, doing, technical support and doing some project and people management, with this idea that, when I came out of undergrad, I was like, I think I want to go to grad school someday. Like, both my parents have advanced degrees, but I don't know what in, and I don't really want to do it right now. I'm pretty burned out from school. So yeah, I spent 3 years working and then went back to grad school. I plan to do the PhD in biostatistics here at the University of Michigan, but I realized pretty quickly that while I sort of had this idea in my head that a PhD would allow me to sort of lead projects and sort of have that more like leadership and management kind of sort of hands-on work, I realized that at least at this department, at least in this sort of area I was in, PhD was much more theoretical and had much less of that sort of like hands-on understanding and project building and whatever. So I ended up leaving after getting my master's, which is actually pretty common, particularly in the biostats department at Michigan, where they often have you don't accept people to the PhD originally, and they have you reapply to the PhD after you finish your master's. So I finished with the master's, and then have sort of flitted around trying to find exactly the right area for me, from both sort of my educational background, but also sort of my interests and my skill set. So, I like to say that like I have the technical expertise, but I also like to talk to people and work with people and sort of use the softer side of data science to get to sort of the bottom of the question and the understanding of what we're trying to figure out now.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to Steve and ask you what you love and what you don't love about your current work, about your job. Are there things that you're doing that you didn't expect to be doing when you started this company, and kind of talk to us a little bit about some of the unexpected things that have popped up for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think the perspective that I would bring to, as the CTO, I manage a team of developers, and we work closely. The way that we're structured at Genomenon is we have our software team that I manage, and my co-founder is our chief science officer, and so he manages the data research team. And we've had a lot of not really growing pain, well, maybe growing pains and sort of lessons that we've learned in having two separate teams that, you know, tend to work together in that regard. So I would say, you know, one of the interesting things that we deal with is, especially in the context of a startup like us, we're about a 20-person company right now. And so we're still relatively small, and we have to be very deliberate about the things that we spend our time on. We would love to have, you know, an R&D branch that has a little bit more leeway to try out random ideas or, you know, place sort of big bets that, you know, may or may not pay off 5 years from now. But as a small startup, we have to be much more deliberate and have a little bit more short-term leaning when we're setting our goals. And so, you know, we live and die by the results that we can produce today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and maybe next year, but not so much yet, you know, 5 years from now or 10 years down the road. And so I would say a lot of the difficulties that we have that I hadn't really expected, you know, when we started building this company is how much time we spend building things that may not be completely scalable, or even rebuilding things that we already have within this other team, because, you know, this team doesn't know our existing infrastructure or technology as intimately as the development team, but still not letting the development team necessarily spend their time correcting them and teaching them everything. Otherwise, you know, we end up not getting anything done with our production technology. And so it's definitely a balance that we've kind of gone back and forth on in terms of how production ready do we want our experiments to be, versus how much time do we want to spend making them production ready. You know, do we want to allow the research team to build something over the course of 8 weeks that we may completely throw away, even if it becomes useful, you know, just because it's not something that can be integrated into our current infrastructure very well, or without a lot of pitfalls. And so I would say I spend a lot of time definitely on the softer side of managing teams, managing objectives, managing motivations, because, you know, there's a lot to think about, especially when you're dealing with a team of really highly skilled people. A lot of my time is also spent thinking about, again, the softer side of sort of motivation and satisfaction across the team, thinking a lot about, you know, extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic. You know, you can't just pay someone more and have them do crap work that they don't want to do. You know, how do you balance the motivations and the goals, the short-term goals, the long-term goals, the short-term motivations, the long-term motivations? How do you put all of that together? And so a lot of it ends up almost being completely separate from the data science aspect for my job. It's more about managing people who are doing a lot of the data science. And then that ignores the fact that I love doing the data science stuff. So, you know, still finding time for myself to jump in and do some experiments with the data, or maybe set up some internal tools that make it easier. And so, you know, it's all, I would say, a balancing act, and you spend a lot of time just sort of orchestrating and balancing the activities of everyone when you're the CTO, or, you know, my co-founder, the CSO, does the same thing.
I want to create a new word, orchestructuring. We almost said it.
We actually have a local meetup group in Ann Arbor called Orchestructure Meetup.
Yeah.
And it's more for DevOps, the setting up and maintaining of infrastructure.
I've not heard it before, but
Great
I'm going to submit it to Merriam-Webster. We're going for it. All right, so we'll go to Sean next. Can you tell us a little bit about what you love and don't love about your job, and also talk a little bit about the unexpected tasks and things that have popped up that since you decided to take the job?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really love is, again, coming from academia and being a postdoc, and getting onto a R&D team where I still have the same amount of independence and being able to still tackle really hard problems has been wonderful. I've been at this job for 5.5 years, and every day there's new challenges. But also a thing that I love about working at TD Ameritrade is just the people. That there are, equivalently smart people, but kind people, right? You name it, we've got it, right? Something that I wouldn't say that I don't love about the job, but maybe tying back to expectations, is that when I transitioned from academia into industry, I naively thought, okay, I'm a good hard worker, right? I can just sit down, put my head down, and spend 90% of my time just crunching numbers and doing the work. And very, very quickly, I realized that when you're in industry, you can't do that. And especially as you're growing in your career, it actually changes more and more and more, right? And so I had to learn that relationships matter a ton, right? Both inside and outside of the company. And for my day-to-day, it might be 60% working on relationships, right? And having empathy, not only for the customers, but for other employees within the company. And for me, that's still something that I continue to work on, right? As a researcher and a scientist, but just as a human being, being able to think about other people, right? In fact, a lot of times when I come home and I feel drained, it's usually a day where I spent the day dealing with the people problems rather than technical problems, right? And but they're always worth it. Both of them are always worth it, right? But I think that for people who are listening here, it's important to keep that in mind. Is that if you want to be super highly independent, not rely on anybody else, maybe stay in academia. But if you have another aspect of you, or that you want to grow the skills, right? Moving into industry, you'll definitely learn how to interact with others.
And Rose, same question to you.
I mean, again, I'm leaving my job, so take that as you will. I really enjoyed it. I really loved the people. I thought I was, doing good work, but it wasn't the work I wanted to be doing necessarily. So I think that sort of to piggyback a little bit on Sean's response, I hadn't thought of it in terms of relationship building, but for me, a big piece is like communication, right? So a lot of my job has been in the past and, probably will be in the future around, how do you communicate well? Like you may be doing great technical work, but if people don't understand what you've done and you're not able to communicate it well, that can be really problematic. Or like you run into somebody's trying to communicate what they want to you and you're not speaking the same language in some way. That can be really troubling as well. And I find that if there's not good documentation or a good sort of baseline, like these are our definitions for things, that can be really frustrating. So that's something that in terms of things that I think will happen everywhere and are things that are, whatever, that can be sort of a frustrating aspect. I mean, I think that one thing that I really love is being able to sort of look back on previous work and say like, I may not realize I'm learning things every single day and growing and whatever, but like being able to look back and like realize, oh crap, that was really maybe not good that I did then, but like, look how much I've grown now. Yeah. So I think generally like part of the reason I'm leaving my current job and have left previous jobs is that I am still sort of searching to understand what I love and don't love and what that means to me in terms of every job that I'm in, and gaining more insight into that every day. So
If I may, real quick,
Please.
what Rose said actually made me think of something else, that we deal with a lot of the same thing with our company, doing something that is so technically nuanced in the first place. We're indexing insight from the medical literature in genomics. There's a lot of what we do, we can boil down to numbers. The problem is the numbers are always sort of loaded and nuanced. And we one example is, one of the useful metrics we have is how many genomics articles have we indexed? And something as simple as that has about 5 different answers depending on why you're asking, which is something that, I actually had to spend a non-trivial amount of time communicating that number to our CEO and our director of marketing. Because, let's say we index an article and we don't find any genomic information in it that's relevant. Does that count toward the number or not? And I can argue both ways. If there's no search you can do in our search engine that would return that article, then for all intents and purposes, it wouldn't really be fair to include that in our metric. On the other hand, the fact that we've indexed the article and found no genomic information is also very useful to our customers. They can be confident that the thing they're looking for is not in that article. So in that regard, we should count it. And so I've spent a lot of time, sort of giving these sorts of metrics to people who aren't in the data science team. And a lot of times what happens is I'll give numbers and then I'll give all the asterisks attached to it. Like, here's the count, but it takes into account this and doesn't take into account this, and you could count this. And what'll happen is a month later, I'll hear people in the company quoting the numbers to people, but without all the attached asterisks. And it becomes a game of telephone from there, where, the numbers that you quoted will end up being quoted a month later in a completely false representation. They'll take this number, but quote it as this other number. And so we've actually spent a fair amount of time like building internal dashboards that list all the numbers, and they're like live updated and they say exactly what the numbers are. So then, there's not this game of telephone or misquoting. And so that was something that what Rose said made me think of, is the communicating the data that you do come up with to non-data people, and how difficult that can be, because they'll tend to remember numbers and not necessarily what the numbers meant.
So we have just a few minutes before we switch over to the Q&A. So I want to ask a 2-part question to each of you. And one is, what are you doing now to continue skill building in your career? And all of you have mentioned soft skills that are needed that you didn't necessarily study. So I'd like you to touch both on technical and soft skills. And then the second part of the question is maybe even a 2-parter in and of itself, which is, if someone were to apply to your company, as a student now, what are the things that you would recommend people do to prepare? Or are there specific things that your company looks for, whether that be an educational background or extracurricular activities or specific skills? Like what are some of the key things that people can do to prepare for a successful career search? So skill building for you, and then 2, essentially, what do you recommend for skill building to prepare for the career to others?
Well, I'll take that one. So from a skills building standpoint, I think I'm in a unique position, again, being on an R&D team, where hopefully every single proof of concept or project that I'm working on involves something new, and that's what we very diligently ask ourselves that constantly, right? What's new here? What's a technology that's new? What's a methodology that's new? And that's a sort of a blessing and a curse, right? Because when you're that far ahead, there's no documentation for you to read. You just kind of have to figure things out along the way, right? And that perhaps also differentiates somebody who's maybe a little bit more junior that requires more guidance, versus somebody who's more senior and can be that effective and independent. But at the same time, from a soft skills standpoint, one thing that I would love to continue to do throughout my career is understand how business works, understand how the organization works as a whole. As a business grows bigger and bigger and bigger, there are many, many moving parts, and understanding how everything fits together and what motivates different people within that company, right, really will benefit you as you traverse that landscape. And then regarding, you know, people who are interested in roles or position at TD Ameritrade, right? I would say that credentials is a small component. I think that if you have a reasonable college degree, that's fantastic, or some sort of certification, that's great. But really from an experience standpoint, what personally I would look for is the ability of an individual to not only start a task or start exploring a task, but actually finishing in it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can do the 80-20 rule and, you know, get most of the way there, and that's good enough, right? But being able to demonstrate that would really help any employer to see that you're able to complete tasks.
And I'm going to follow up on that just really quickly. Can you offer an example? Like, have you seen like value projects that have come in from applicants that have been worthwhile? And can you just give an example or two?
Yeah, so there are maybe two types, right, that immediately come to mind. One type are students that have a class project and everybody's just doing that same class project. And you have to realize that I see resumes like that all the time, right? Especially year after year after year, right? And then eventually by next year, I know that this was assigned to you. What I really want to see is that you've explored something, right? Where maybe you have some GitHub repository where I can see that you started with a question and then you started plotting out different ways that you can address that question. And then what was the outcomes that you observed, right? Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just showing the thought process, or even write a blog post about it, right? Of things that you found worked, where you got stuck, right? And that really helps from a hiring perspective to know.
Perfect, thank you. Rose, let's go to you. So how do you continue to skill build? And then what are I'm gonna ask you to answer for Thermo Fisher. What are the things that you see that would be beneficial for students to be hired at Thermo Fisher?
Yeah, so in terms of skill building, I'd say definitely I am still skill building. As I sort of mentioned, like looking back at previous technical like stuff, I can see that I'm growing and learning from that regard. I find that, I don't know, I mean, while I am a, you know, data scientist and co-organizer of the PyData meetup and things like that, like, I don't really know Python. Like, I know R, that's my area of expertise, and I know C++, and I sort of have never fully put the two together. Like, I've written small Python scripts and like whatever. So I think trying to find opportunities to sort of explicitly build the skills that maybe you don't fully have yet. So looking for opportunities where like, oh, this doesn't quite work with R. Maybe I move to Python. Maybe I ask an expert. So I know, like, at Thermo Fisher, there was a project I worked on where I needed to work with a particular file format. It was just easier to use a Python library because it already existed. And so I worked with a developer and we paired and we talked through it. And the things that I was missing were really like specific Python syntax things as opposed to sort of broader sort of technical and programming skills. And sort of with our powers combined, we've created a first draft of the script, and then I was able to build upon it and sort of learn more and feel more confident in that sort of very technical area through that. In terms of skills for Thermo Fisher, who will soon be hiring to replace myself and someone else, so if you're looking for a bioinformatics role, keep an eye out. So I think that there's sort of a combination of technical expertise and subject matter expertise, that there's like sort of a balance between that I think they would be looking for in a bioinformatics role. So I think not having the specific oncology subject matter expertise, that's totally fine. Like, I don't know a lot about oncology. So it's being able to sort of show either sort of tangential, so like I have a genetics background, but not an oncology genetics background. So sort of showing that broad knowledge base is helpful, but also being able to show, even if you don't have that broad knowledge base of like sort of genetics generally, being able to show like, you know, I personally worked in a couple of different subject matter sort of areas in the medical school. So being able to show like, not only, maybe I don't have this particular subject matter area expertise, but I'm able to learn quickly. I'm able to show that I've had this experience sort of switching subject matter and gaining a deep knowledge quickly. So I think that's important. And then I think sort of technical skills. So I use R largely. Most of the team that I was on used Python, but I know for the sort of Thermo Fisher interview, it was like a 1 hour talk. So some folks have PhDs and are used to giving like job talks, right? I didn't, so I sort of made a talk from my graduate school research and a project I'd work on for a class and a couple of other things to show that sort of both subject matter, but also technical skills, and being able to communicate those technical skills to the larger group.
Thank you. And finally, Steve, I'll ask you to answer those two questions, and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Sure, I'll try to keep mine relatively short. In terms of continuing my own education, I spend a lot of time reading. Probably 1 to 3 hours a day at least, reading about either reading studies or reading about new technologies or software packages or industry trends, or what competitors are doing, or just other interesting things happening in the industry. It's just a lot of reading, honestly. I also spend a fair amount of time digging into things on my own. I live in the command line. I love opening up data sets, exploring them, throwing together quick scripts to see what kind of information I can pull out. That's pretty much all there is, to that for me anyway. It's a lot of reading. In terms of what I look for when hiring, I completely agree with what Sean said in terms of, we get a lot of resumes, honestly, from grad students who either just graduated or are graduating soon, that all have the same class projects in there as what they did. One of the things that I really look for is one of the things actually that's really hard to find, I've seen in most highly skilled technical positions, is pragmatism and some sort of demonstration of practicality, which I think sort of gets to what Sean was talking about having finished a project, even following the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. When I find people who have actually dug into not just a technology, but an area, one of the things I usually tell, not necessarily data scientists, but founders of startups, is be in love with the problem, not the solution. Because your solution is going to change, it's going to iterate. And if you're in love with the problem, that's really what gives you the motivation to stick with something and find the solution to the problem. It's funny in some regards, because data science is almost the exact opposite 80% of the time. It's, a technology, how to analyze data, and you're out searching for a problem that you can potentially solve with that data. Sometimes that's how the giant leaps are taken. Sometimes it is made that way. It is starting with the technology and then finding a problem that it happens to solve. But like I said, when I'm hiring, especially for a highly technical role, it's often hard for me to find people who have a demonstrable history or track record of pragmatism and practicality, having found a problem, fallen in love with the problem, built something on their own, that shows their ability to apply what they know to an actual problem set. I think one of the reasons it's so hard is a lot of the times the most highly skilled technical people are highly skilled because of how much they enjoy what they do. And it's almost a double-edged sword, because when you really enjoy the act of doing something, that's great for you, but it also often means that the applicability of what you're doing is irrelevant. It doesn't matter, because you get your satisfaction just from doing it. And that's sort of the double-edged sword, is a lot of times the most highly skilled people are the most difficult to sort of rein in and align with what you're trying to get done, and being able to say, that's good enough. Like, we can use this and run with it. You don't have to spend another 4 weeks polishing it or making it 10% faster or solving for this edge case that in our application we'll probably never encounter. And so I would say that's one of the big things I look for. it's difficult to look for that. It's, you know, some of the questions I ask in the interview, and it's looking for, you know, personal projects that you've done that you weren't just assigned. And, you know, work experience helps too, which isn't the best thing to tell a bunch of people who are fresh out of school. That's the sort of catch-22 that you'll face, is a lot of people will want you to have work experience, but won't hire you without it. So then how do you get work experience? Like that's tough.
Well, thank you. Those are all really helpful insights. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. We're going to do a Q&A. I know a couple of our panelists have to jump off right at 1, but I know Sean at least is able to stay for a few minutes after. So we're going to try to get through all of these questions. And I'll turn it over to James, who will moderate the Q&A portion.
Awesome. Thanks, Trish. Yeah, so I am just taking a look here to see, I'm trying to filter a little bit, but I guess we'll go, you know, first come, first serve. So we have a question from Anonymous here. The job market in this field seems to be getting more and more competitive. What is your advice on how to stay competitive as a candidate? Additionally, what are your recommendations on how to prepare for and navigate tough technical questions? Thanks. I feel like Rose may have missed the first.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Zoom has dropped me twice now, so I apologize. I'm back. I was like, this is probably for me since I'm.
No, that's all right. It's this one's kind of open, but I'll read it back again.
Okay, thank you.
Since you dropped out halfway through. So the job market in this field of data science seems to be getting more and more competitive. What's your advice on how to stay competitive as a candidate? And additionally, what are your recommendations on how to prepare for and navigate tough technical questions?
I mean, I find that, and like I've given this advice to others, like I've been asked in the past, like by graduate students, by undergrads, I'm going into the job market, what methodology should I brush up on? Like, should I like look at types of regression and whatever? And I have always said, no, I don't think that makes sense. Like the question, whenever I've gotten a question that was like, tell me about this specific methodology, I've always sort of felt like, I don't want to work here. And like, do you really care what I can recall from a class I took about survival analysis? Or do you care about my ability to, you know, take a technical problem and sort of think through it? So I think a lot of technical questions that I have gotten in job interviews and sort of have helped others prepare for are around like, here's a data problem, talk me through your thought process. And maybe that involves some sort of technical specifics if you've encountered a particular type of problem like that before. But a lot of what folks are trying to understand is like, do you have not only like the particular technical skills, which a lot of the time, like your degree in, you know, data science or statistics or computer science or whatever or your certification probably can vouch for you, right? Like, and some of that sort of your credentials can sort of say, or your past job experience can say, you know, I have this technical skill. But a lot of what I've found employers are looking for is not just, I have this technical skill, but I can think about a problem technically, and I can describe to you what I would do, what steps I would take. And sometimes the answer is like, well, I haven't necessarily tackled a problem like this before, but this is the process I would use to like look for technical literature and look for software packages and, you know, look for other tools out there and try them out and see what happens and do this kind of assessment. So I think preparing that kind of sort of workflow-based technical problem, if that makes sense, as opposed to, and everyone has paused. So.
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Rose down again. Okay.
She knew it was going to happen.
She knew, she saw it.
I mean, real quick, I'll say I completely agree with what Rose was saying. I have an analogy that I often use in a slightly different context, but I think it applies here. When you're quizzing someone on a specific technology, you know, for an actual position or a role where their role is not necessarily to use the technology, but to apply what they know to solve problems. It's kind of like hiring someone to build you a house and quizzing them on their use of a hammer. how much experience do you have with this particular hammer, and where in the house would you use this hammer? Like it's kind of pointless. Obviously their use of a hammer may be a prerequisite to getting the job done, but it's such it's so much of an implementation detail that it's almost not worth wasting your time talking about. And so I totally agree in that regard. From the hiring perspective of, I tend to try not to focus on specific technologies, but rather, mindsets, like how do you approach problems? How do you find the solution?
Yeah, and I would add to, even from the question, right, saying that it's a competitive landscape. I think that might be a perception. I think the fact of the matter is that there's a ton of data science roles out there that are and that number will continue to increase, right? And so there really now is a prime time to be hiring into data science role. But I think, adding to what others are saying here too, right, is I think I would rather look for creativity in what somebody is bringing to the table, right? And that maybe following what Steve was saying about sometimes if you want to learn how to swim, you can't read a book about it, right? You just got to get your feet wet, right? And I would rather somebody tell me how they were successful, maybe unsuccessful along the way, right? But again, going back to what I was saying about creativity, I think that's a huge plus, and differentiate yourself. So what are you bringing to the table that helps you differentiate yourself? Because if everybody's learning the same skills, that's not a differentiator, right? Sometimes it's enough to be kind. Sometimes it's enough to make sure that you're doing enough networking, being connected to the right people, right? That might be able to open a door for you. So don't forget those things.
Brilliant. So going on to the next one, I think this question I think is on a lot of people's minds, especially right now. Jessica's asking, what advice would you give someone trying to obtain a data science role, especially in the current uncertain job market?
I mean, I might say apply, right? Like, don't be scared and apply. I find that to sort of, networking is incredibly important. Like the last 2 jobs that I got sort of were, based on my own amazing skills, but also based on sort of networking and meeting people and being able to like get somebody to email somebody who knows somebody, like sort of get that connection that way. But I also think that just part of it is like talking with people, so you're not just a name, but like apply to a bunch of stuff. I'm always a proponent of, like, even if you're not fully sure that you're the right fit for the role, like you might be, or you might be the best candidate even if you're not a perfect fit, or maybe they realize partway through that like maybe their job description isn't quite right. Like I've applied to jobs and I've been in situations where like somebody just copied the job requisition from the previous job posting and they didn't change it, and the job is different, but they just never changed what the job description was. So if you think something sounds interesting, that's important. If you think you have the skills for it, that's important. Apply and be able to make a compelling case for why you're a good fit or why it's interesting to you. But it doesn't hurt to apply even the things you don't necessarily feel are perfect, I guess.
Yeah, I'll say one advantage of the current situation is there's a lot of companies applying for remote roles that weren't traditionally applying for remote roles. So I would say widen your search area. You can now apply and interview completely over Zoom to large companies that were never doing that before, and you can get the job and work from home. So one advantage is you can now widen your search much more easily and have a lot more positions available to apply to, I think. Another, I would say, just really specific practical piece of advice is find the companies that you are actually interested in working for and seek out positions at that company. Do some research on, figure out why you want to work at that company and let them know. I can't tell you how few applicants to jobs I post will actually, A, send a cover letter, B, actually tailor the cover letter to our company and tell me why they like our company specifically. That it almost never happens. I mean, especially when using, job sites like Indeed or something like that, I'll get 100 resumes and maybe 5 or 10 of them will have cover letters, and only one of those cover letters will talk about our company, which is pretty insane to me. That was when I was following what Rose said. My first job out of college was to a position that I wasn't qualified for. It said 10 years experience minimum, and I was applying straight out of college. I don't necessarily recommend doing that all the time because it can be pretty annoying from a job posting point of view. But at the same time, it's more of just, recognizing that there's no real rules. And like, if you want a position, find the person and let them know why you want that position.
And I would cast a wide net too, right? I think a lot of times, especially people who are scientists or data scientists in academia, you might tend to overanalyze, right? And you see a job posting and you're thinking, well, I'm only a 92% match to this job posting. I've learned that if you're probably like a 60% match in terms of what they're looking for, but you want to learn the next 20, 30%, you should apply, right? And be excited about it. But following what Steve said about making sure that you're tailoring your resumes, applying for jobs can sometimes be a full-time job, right? And you do want to make sure that you want to, again, differentiate yourself from everybody else. So you want to be seen, and hopefully you'll get to the top of that list. But cast that net wider than you'd think, and even taking that opportunity, because the goal of the resume is not necessarily to get hired. The goal as a resume is to get an interview, is to get somebody to call you back, right? And if you keep on, submitting the same resume unchanged to 10, 20, 30 different companies and expecting a different outcome, then you're probably doing something wrong. So.
And I would sort of add on to that, like, if you're not excited enough about the role or excited enough about the company that you can't muster that excitement for a cover letter to like write a cover letter to talk about it, like probably you shouldn't be applying. Like, I know I said like apply to a bunch of stuff, but I think that like the apply to a bunch of stuff, but a bunch of stuff you're excited about, and why you're excited about any particular role could be really different, right? Like, so I think that's sort of, I like that these all sort of tie in together, like casting a wide net. Part of that is like, maybe you're really interested in some subject area, or really excited in some technology, or really excited in some, insert something else here, right? Like, the excitement is what matters. And like being able to convey that excitement either through a cover letter, a resume, or networking with someone is what gets you in front of them, so you can continue to talk about that excitement in an interview.
And even the job posting might not sound exciting, but the moment you actually talk to somebody and then you realize that the job posting isn't really what the role entails. And in fact, the real role, right, maybe somebody who is lazy when they posted that job posting, right? And so you can talk to an HR person, talk to the hiring manager, and realize that, no, it turns out to be exactly what I'm looking for.
And writing data science like job postings is incredibly hard because people don't necessarily have the same like language around it. Like, I had a conversation with someone in like upper levels HR at Thermo Fisher about like, how do you talk about data science? What is, like, outside of buzzwords, like how do you actually attract the right people and get people to apply to your posting when like the idea of data science versus data analysis versus machine learning, like all of these sort of buzzwords, like what does it really mean for somebody who's looking for a job? And it can mean different things at different companies. It can mean different things at different teams at different companies. It's sort of hard to know, A, how careful they were when they wrote the job, but B, that you're operating under the same sort of word definitions, even in terms of some of these sort of, technical terms and types of roles.
Perfect. So just for anyone who's watching the clock, we're at 1:03 p.m. So I'm not sure if anyone.
I pushed my meeting.
Perfect.
I can stick around as well.
Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep rolling for a bit here then, because we're having a lot of good questions coming in. So next one we have here is from another anonymous. I am currently studying bioinformatics, and I'm finding it a little difficult finding both internship opportunities to build experience, as well as finding ways to network with other people in the field. When you were in college, or I guess even post-grad, how did you go about doing this in your recruiting process?
So in terms of internships, I know this summer and this year in particular is very hard. Like we were about, at Thermo Fisher, we were about to give, or maybe actually the intern had like gotten an offer, but because of like the financial uncertainty around coronavirus, it ended up getting sort of squashed and didn't happen, unfortunately. So I know this summer is particularly hard. I never had an internship in college. I like worked at summer camps and I did like a summer institute for biostatistics at the University of Pittsburgh before my senior year of college. But other than that, like, yeah, I was a summer camp counselor. So I don't know that I have a lot of insight into that, but in terms of networking, like go to stuff. So like, not to overly plug PyData, but come to PyData when we have them in person. It feels like you're very, it can be scary, right? Like you're like, I don't belong here. But I would really recommend sort of finding any opportunity, whether it's an alumni group or like a student group at your school or Midas or, you know, a local meetup or anything really. I mean, I've gone to panels at, you know, Spark and MishBio. I saw Steve Schwartz talk at something else earlier this year, right? So go to things, meet people, deal with the awkwardness of networking. Like I hate it sometimes personally, but you do it and it's helpful. Like you really do meet interesting people who are interested in what you have to say, and it really helps you refine sort of that elevator pitch, that ability to talk about what you do concisely and passionately in a way that I really think no other experience can.
I'm actually going to jump in because I've recently been kind of just exploring a website called thescienceofpeople.com. And there's the creator of that website has a book called Captivate. And basically what they've done is they've taken, they've set up cameras at networking events and they've watched and like analyzed movement patterns and you know, if this person talks to this many people in this many sections of the room, how many business cards do they walk away with, and those sorts of things. And they've done a lot of other studies like that, but they basically have developed a toolkit for developing your elevator pitch and navigating a networking event, and some other scenarios as well. But if you're interested in, and if that's something that's a challenge for you, there are tools out there. That's just one example for being able to research and basically hack how to be an effective communicator and an effective networker. You don't just have to wing it. And I think that that's just one resource that I would recommend that's honestly been helpful for me to navigate those types of things, which can be overwhelming for me, even as an extrovert.
Yeah, I'll say when I first started Alpha Django, I originally started it with my best friend who was originally a co-founder. And one of the issues we had early on was when we started the company, we said, you'll do these kinds of projects, I'll do these. And then I started going to a lot of networking events. This was like 15 years ago. And I started finding projects and I started getting some consulting jobs that I could do. And I wasn't getting any that he could do. And he was upset. He said, you know, why you're getting only jobs for yourself, none for me. And I said, well, you need to come out with me because I'm not there to get jobs. I'm there just to talk to people. And the problem with that is when I'm networking, it's not about pitching what I can do for everyone. It's just about being interested in people and talking to them and letting the conversation go where it goes and seeing, you know, what sorts of opportunities may or may not come from that down the road. And so the problem is I know what I do. it's interesting. And so when I'm talking to people, a lot of times that's where the conversation just naturally gravitates, because it tends to gravitate toward whatever your common interests are with someone. And so my common interest with someone is not going to be something I don't do. And so the point of that little anecdote being, I think one of the things that can make networking so difficult is when you do treat it like a job, like it's, I have to do X, Y, and Z when I'm there. The best networking I've seen comes when you can either genuinely enjoy it or trick yourself into genuinely enjoying it. Find, and I think even coming from a data science point of view, you can do that. It's, one of the things that's always fascinated me is how much of the world is only the way that you see it, meaning no one actually sees the world for the way it is. You see it based on your experiences and how those have contributed to your own biases. And, not to go off on that tangent, but the point being, I'm fascinated by how everyone else's worldviews are the result of their experiences. And that's one of the ways that I, being as a child, being an introvert, that's one of the ways that I've sort of become an extrovert, is realizing that people are fascinating, and so I think that's a really good way to sort of approach networking, is just sort of being fascinated by the people that you're talking to, finding out what their experiences are and how that influences their worldview and what sorts of problems they're having and that sort of thing.
I like to, when I'm talking to data scientists or aspiring data scientists, I like to remind them that don't forget that these are 5 people on camera talking to you right now. If you're a data scientist, you should collect more data, right? Which means get out there and talk to more and more people. And eventually you're going to find some sort of consensus that you either agree with, right? Or that maybe might shatter one of your perspectives. I also wanted to plug, if those of you who aren't aware, there's a really nice book that came out recently called Build a Career in Data Science. It's a Manning book published by Emily Robinson and Jacqueline Nolis. You should go check it out. Again, it's called Build a Career in Data Science. If you Google it, you'll see that you can read it for free. And there's a lot of really good tidbits of information there, especially for those who are going along that data science path. But additionally, want to add, remember to keep an open mind, even for somebody like myself, right? That when I first was looking for a job in industry, I never thought that I'd end up in finance. I had never invested a day in my life up until that point. I didn't know what trading stocks was all about. But I knew that I could, given enough time and resources, I could teach myself anything, right? I knew that much. And in fact, it wasn't, getting out there, I went to go to different job fairs in and around the area, attended different meetups in Ann Arbor. And even the day that I was at a job fair, handing in my resumes to different companies, TD Ameritrade was there. But I was like, what am I going to do at a finance company? I'm not a programmer, because it seems like that's what they're looking for. And it was actually one person that I had played volleyball with that was also at the job fair. He turned to me and said, did you hand in your resume over there? I think you'd be great for that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so just on a whim, just threw my resume in. And I will tell you that the job that I sort of interviewed for, I didn't get that first job. Okay, I was passed over for somebody who had more experience, right? And then next thing you know, but just, no hard feelings, didn't take it personally. They called me back probably 7 weeks later, and I landed my dream job, right? So things happen in really strange ways, right? But you got to keep your options open, and then the rest is history. And
I would say also in terms of some of that, like keeping your mind open and networking and things like that, my Thermo Fisher job, I sort of networked my way onto their radar. I was at the SPH alumni event, which somebody who worked at SPH, I got to chatting with her, and she was like, let me set you up with some people I know, and so I ended up having coffee with her brother-in-law, who is currently my boss's boss, kind of thing, right? And so it's super random. Definitely not an event I went to with the idea that I'm gonna find myself a new job here. But that's sort of how it ended up working out somehow, like a year later, basically. But it was sort of very much, you can't really tell what's going to happen, right? So worth a shot to try.
And another thing to keep in mind too is I think that as people are going through school, it tends to happen in like groups of, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years, right? But one thing to keep in mind is that when you get into industry, especially if you're in a technology field, moving jobs is actually a normal thing. If you're out in Silicon Valley, moving jobs every 18 months, moving to different companies, that's like good on you, right? Maybe you're growing your career. I think that in academia, people tend to think that, well, this is going to be forever. I'm going to make this choice and it'll be a forever choice, right? So keep in mind that there's not necessarily that stigma in industry, especially not in tech.
Like that. And kind of going along with that point you just made, Sean, this next question I think is really interesting. I'm just loving the anonymous people in our Q&A, so sorry for that. But Anonymous asks, what are some mid-career challenges that we might face? We spend a lot of time talking about early career challenges, but what can I expect later in my time as a data scientist? Because my assumption would have been, as not a data scientist, let me first admit that, my assumption would have been moving around a lot could be one of those challenges, either just trying to find a job somewhere else or dealing with the stigma of shifting careers, because I've just made my first career transition coming to Midas. So, and that was like a big thing to overcome for me.
I think maybe one thing that's not so obvious is different tracks, different career tracks, right? At a company. I think in academia, it's pretty clear which direction you're heading in, right? For to define success. And I think that's probably the first thing that one should do is, what does success look like for you, personally, right? Because it's gonna be different for each person. But I think in industry, there could be multiple different tracks. You can go sort of the management route, you can go the technical route, you can even go the consulting route, right, where you become your own boss, so to speak, right? But each has its pros and cons. And I think that if you're going to stay on the technical track, you have to be mindful that as you get up there, you will be expected to be fairly independent, right? And maybe mentoring other folks. Versus on the management track, you'll probably be doing less of the technical work, especially as you get high up there, but that you will be managing a group of or a team, right? And then on the consulting route, there are other challenges, right? Especially if you're consulting on your own versus being a part of a larger consulting company.
As the CTO of a startup, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that.
I'm going to jump
this. Oh, I was just going to say, I, of course, have changed jobs every year and a half, and that's something that I'm worried about too. So I don't know. We are at May 2020. I graduated from my master's in June or April or May 2016, and I am on job 4. So I don't know. Hoping it's okay.
I'm going to jump in and ask a question just that I've had a lot of students ask in the past, and we have 3 very different educational backgrounds. So I'd like for you all to talk a little bit about your decision-making process around how far to go in your education. We have some students at the undergrad and master's level who are thinking about grad school, thinking about PhD, or whether to enter the workforce. And so I'd love to hear each of your perspectives on that question, if and kind of what are the reasons to go forward and do more schooling. Who wants to start?
So how about this? My co-founder would actually be the perfect person to answer that question because he got his MD and PhD and then left academia to start a startup with me. And someone on Reddit had asked pretty much that same question, and he has an answer I can literally read to you. It says, I went all the way through my MD PhD training, including residency and fellowship, before I realized I was, so keep in mind, MD PhD, so not necessarily a data scientist, but he did do molecular genomics. So he did have a lot of experience there. I realized I was more interested in a career on the commercial side, specifically in startups. The reward structure of science careers and the publishing grant writing cycles were not as appealing to me. I finally realized as the faster pace and more immediate value realization on the startup side. Moreover, I am still very much engaging in scientific pursuits on this side, so get to indulge my creativity and intellect while still pursuing commercial success. I didn't have any pressure from family, but definitely had peers and advisors look down at my decision initially, but I have been happy in my position and feel like I have broadened my outlook on the way the world works and how real world change is affected, and wish I had made the jump sooner. There is a lot of room for you to continue to grow and develop in your career and industry, so I wouldn't give much more thought to what your detractors are saying when addressing a question about moving out of academia and into the commercial side.
And thank you. That's great perspective. The person that asked the question on the Q&A was specifically wanting to enter industry. So I'd love to hear from you, Sean, just as someone who did do a PhD and is now working in industry. If you can see, I mean, I'm sure there are benefits, but if you can just kind of analyze and dissect kind of what that's meant to your career away from academia.
Yeah. I like to joke in that I say I would never wish a PhD on anybody except for my worst enemies. Okay, but honestly, I think that if you are motivated, right, and sort of hungry to get to learn, to get things done, right, and you have a reasonably good like BS detector, I think that will get you very far, and that's sort of regardless of what education you have. Right. I think for myself personally, having gone through, graduate school, I've gone through a postdoc, I have a lot of grit, right, and sort of perseverance. But that doesn't mean that you don't have it, right? And so I think that what I would make, and I don't want like degrees to be like gatekeeping, right? But I think at the same time, if you are uncertain about where you want to be, right? Sometimes more education might help you, but again, if you're in sort of some financial hardship, right? Then these are only decisions that you can make for yourself, right? But if you're trying to buy some time to figure things out, sometimes it's not a bad idea. But at the same time, like if you have an ego, you probably want to stay in academia, right? But maybe if you're finding that you don't like the egos that are in academia, especially as you're rising through the education system, then sometimes you'll find that industry is pretty nice. Like there are a lot of really nice people. They're not out to get you or tell you that you're wrong, right? I think that sometimes our education system is somewhat imbalanced, in that what matters is grades, but then often or being perfect, right? Being perceived as perfect or getting higher marks, right? But in industry, as you said before, 80-20, right? Sometimes you just have to be good enough, because at the end of the day, time is money. If you're trying to perfect things over the course of 5 years versus finishing something in 2 weeks, which is just good enough, right? And you can get a product or something or a new feature out to a customer, that's probably sufficient. So.
I also, as somebody who didn't get a PhD, I think passion and interest matter a lot too, right? Like it's sort of this, as Sean said, it's like a perseverance thing and a grit thing. And part of it is like, I heard the analogy of like the academic hoops, right? So like, at what point are you tired of jumping through the hoops and you don't want to jump through the hoops anymore? And like for me, it was pre-PhD. For others, it's post-PhD. For others, it's post-tenure, post-whatever, right? Like, and the like sort of rock star academics are still jumping through those hoops and want to be doing that. And I think like, it's sort of this like, do you have the drive and the passion to jump through the hoop? Great. If you don't, you'll probably be miserable, and at some point will like hit a point where you're like, actually, I don't want to jump through this hoop. And so sort of having that honest conversation with yourself, I think, was important for me in my own decision making when it came to deciding not to do the PhD, even when I was like in the thick of it. But that's as much insight as I can give there.
So we're coming up on an hour and a half. So I think what I'd like is, James, if you see maybe one last question that we could pose to everyone here, and then maybe we can just catalog some of these other questions and see if we can maybe get some answers to share out to the group afterward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then I just want to say preemptively for people that are logging off here, just thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, and certainly thank you to our panelists as well. And so let's get one last question and wrap it up.
For sure. All right, so last one we have is coming from Joy, and she's asking, how do you transfer your academic/research skills into solving real-world problems in industry, especially if you are either switching out of academia or switching to a new industry? How do you leverage that experience if you don't have a lot of like real world beforehand?
Say, I don't know that there's necessarily a shortcut beyond getting to know what the real world problems are, like getting involved in the industry, talking to people who have dealt with those problems, and finding out. Again, it kind of goes back to like being interested in what their problems are and talking through them, and being able to identify where your skill set may in some way be related to a solution to their problem, or something along those lines. It's really hard for me to think of, like a specific shortcut other than getting out there and understanding what the problems in that industry may be. And sometimes it might be a multi-step process. It's, rather than, for example, going into a startup in that industry that's going to be really small and need you to be a self-starter and a self-manager, and bringing in a lot of sort of tangential or related and complementary skills beyond just the data science in and of itself. It might be that in order to work at a startup that's going to expect all that, you first want to work at a larger company that's going to be able to provide more structure, more context, more complementary skill sets in the team around you that can help you come up to speed on those things, and then being able to take that to a startup, a few years later, to kind of build on what Sean was saying about, the job you're looking for now may not necessarily be the job. You maybe start thinking of your career as more like a chess game than a checkers game, making the move now that's going to set you up for where you want to be later. Is, I guess, what my answer to that would be. Basically, figure out what area you can, or what position you can put yourself into that's going to set you up to start understanding the aspects that you don't yet have experience in, get experience in those aspects, and then trying to solve those, rather than necessarily trying to like come in and do everything right out of the gate.
I think it also comes down to creativity, right? So I think I sort of think of myself as like a creative problem solver, and every job I've had, while they've been sort of very different areas and very different, like even like types of methodology or types of thinking, kind of, I still think that like the undercurrent in all of that is creative problem solving, right? And so sort of being able to talk about sort of the academic stuff, like the research scientist kind of stuff that you've been doing, in a way that highlights like, this is sort of, and I know I got cut off in this answer before, but sort of this is the workflow, this is the problem solving, this is the creative mindset I had when I was thinking about these things. And as somebody who's like sort of jumped from subject matter to subject matter and not necessarily, not necessarily been consistent in that realm, I personally think that a lot of it is being able to talk about the problem solving and talk about your experience and sort of spin it to the subject matter. Like my experience in X would be applicable in Y because it has a similar way of thinking or whatever, right? But that there's not as much, I personally don't think there's as much of a sort of huge gaping divide between academia and industry, outside of sort of the incentive structure and the like sort of pace of things, maybe, in my experience. But that I don't think that there's sort of this like, oh, well, if you come from academia, people in industry are going to sort of say, well, they don't have real experience. I don't think that's true, particularly because basically, I mean, lots of people in industry have academic experience, right? Like lots of people have master's degrees or PhDs or did research or understand that like your academic insights are really valuable. At the very least, the skills that you learned there, and they can teach the academic quirks out of you if they're concerned about it.
Yeah, I think one thing that I notice a lot of academics lose sight of is they tend to refer to skills as like, hard technical skills, right? But I've learned maybe over time writing my own resume and reading resumes that like you should it helps to frame things as kind of like this so-called project management triangle, right? Of something can be like faster, better, cheaper, right? And I would think about when you're in academia and you're a scientist, what did you do, right? Because obviously you're working on something because you want to make it better, maybe faster process, right? Make it lower cost, but being able to articulate and quantify how you improve something and what skill was required to achieve that. And it oftentimes isn't even some major insight, right? It might be that you realize that you could just skip a step, right? Or that you approach the problem from a different angle. Maybe instead from a applied math angle, you come at it from a computer science angle, right? So all of these things are skills, or you have a really good eye for detail. These are all very, very important things. And I find that if I see those quantifiable numbers on a resume where you saved the lab money, right, that you're working in, or you improve the efficiency somehow by X%, I think that tends to be very valuable, because that also tells me that you are self-reflective, that you understand what you brought to the table that differentiates yourself from everybody else.
Perfect. And I think that's a great place to end. I can't thank you guys enough for taking the time to spend with us today and giving us a little bit extra time. So we hope to continue the relationship, and hopefully we'll have more conversations in the future with all of you. And thank you to our attendees for joining us as well. So with that, we'll sign off, and we'll be in touch with an event recording, maybe some additional answers to some of the Q&As, and a survey. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.